Let's check in on the big economic picture now and catch up with Simon Cowan from the Centre for Independent Studies. Good to talk to you again, Simon.
Great to be back, Chris.
Hey, look, first up, can I get your assessment on the lockdown in Victoria? Of course, we've talked about how Australia's sort of powering through economically better than many expected, but locking down the second largest state for a week and maybe longer is going to be another hammer blow to the national economy, isn't it?
Well, all of those lockdowns have negative consequences. The longer they are and the more consequential they are, like the bigger the states, the more important they'll be. We saw that the country was somewhat insulated, I think, last year by the enormous quantity of government spending. Thankfully, it doesn't look like we're going to go through that again, but there's pressure, increasing pressure as the lockdown extends. But I think, I've long been an advocate for the approach that's been adopted here in New South Wales, the contact tracing and testing, the QR codes that don't seem to have been adopted as enthusiastically around the country, I think is one of the reasons why we keep seeing these small-scale lockdowns in WA, in Brisbane, in Melbourne, where we don't see the equivalent sort of lockdowns in Sydney.
Yeah, well, the data has shown that of the first 6 lockdowns in this country this year, 4 of them had absolutely no impact whatsoever, and at least one of the others it was marginal. And so far in this one, the impact has been very marginal because most of the infections have been in people who were already isolated. I want to come back to that quantum of spending in a moment, but first up, I suppose, the consequences of it. Are you surprised that we've been able to keep employment levels at such high rates in this country, that unemployment isn't higher than it is now? And does that mean we're going to see some wages growth in the coming year?
So I think, first of all, in terms of unemployment, the figures are well ahead of where most people were predicting this time last year. Of course, this time last year, we were expecting the pandemic to be far more dangerous and protracted. The lockdowns, at this time of year, we were thinking the lockdowns could have extended to September, whereas in reality, they were over before that. So I think the recovering economy certainly exceeded expectations. We'd like to think that eventually that will translate into wage growth, although we saw today Stephen Kennedy was suggesting that the increases in the super guarantee are going to eat up a lot of what might have otherwise been wage growth across the forward estimates. I think the hope is that those fundamentals, the fundamental equation, as unemployment falls, as growth rises, as we see inflation start to rise, the expectation is that wages will grow along with that. If that doesn't happen, then I think we're going to be facing a far more serious and a far more dangerous situation.
Yeah, well, talking about the threats in the future, we've talked a lot about debt in this country. There were huge concerns when it was heading over $300 billion, $400 billion. Now we're heading out to $1 trillion, $1,000 billion. And you're looking for a silver lining on that. As someone like yourself who favours a market economy and economic reform, there's no way known we're paying that back, right? So on the good side, it means the governments from here on in, whether they're Labor or Liberal, have to focus on economic growth. The only thing that puts this debt into a size that we can deal with it is continued economic growth.
Absolutely. In the long run, it's productivity. In many respects, it was deeply disappointing from an economic rationalist position to see what the coalition did in the budget. It's not even so much the massive temporary spending boom, it's the permanent increases in the size of government. The government is expecting across the forward estimates and out to 2030 that the size of government will exceed the emergency levels we saw in the global financial crisis. Now, to me, that is a failure of governance. It's a failure of government. It's a failure of economics. Unfortunately, this big government pandemic is likely to continue for far longer. And I think big government itself and the sort of things that we've entrenched in our economy and in our government spending are not the kind of things that will generate productivity growth. And the big shame, I think, is the government will have spent so much money coming out of this pandemic, but at the end of the day, what's it actually invested in terms of productivity? Very little.
Yeah, we'll get you back on in the future, Simon, to talk about some of the areas where it could tackle productivity. Thanks for joining us.
My pleasure, as always.
Simon Cowan there, who's great to talk to on these sorts of issues. He is spot on. The real worry here is the way government has expanded permanently. A lot of what was in the budget is increased spending that will be in every federal budget from here on in. Federal government as a share of the economy is now up to sort of 27%, back close to a third of the economy. It's a real worry, and we've got to be smarter about how we run the joint. But all those challenges are yet to come.